like, is she crying? When was she crying?
Well, we can put it at the end. Like, it's fine.
Oh my God. It was only a matter of time before I cried on this podcast.
I think we did pretty good. Like, not for us not crying until episode 3.
All things
like,
considered. Welcome, everyone, to episode 3 of Twinning with Anna and Ida. I am one of your twins and co-hosts, Anna Viascamani.
How many twins are there? There's generally 2, yeah. So.
One of the
I'm
twins.
the other twin. I'm the other twin, Ida Escamani. It's good to be in your ears today.
We want to first just give a shout out to all the kind comments we've been getting about this podcast, and especially for folks that are feeling really overwhelmed by the information around us and looking for a path to get plugged in. And that's why we're here, is to be that light in a sea of darkness. And of course, I think both of us enter today's episode with really heavy hearts and just a lot of weight. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. Ida, I know that you and I have both just been immersed in what's happening around the world right now, and I just want to make sure that we spend some time diving into it. And the topic for us today is going to be immigration. And of course, in Minneapolis, as we're recording this, we continue to see extreme federal overreach, not just targeting immigrants, but terrorizing people and killing innocent bystanders and protesters. And so, honestly, there's just no words to really express how I'm feeling right now. But the feeling of heavy is definitely there.
Yeah, I mean, we're essentially witnessed the execution of an American at the hands of the federal government with no due process. And it's not the first time someone has been killed by ICE. And it, of course, links to just a broader assault on all of our freedoms. And just classic authoritarian tactics that are horrifying, but in many ways a playbook that is predictable. To your point, leveraging terror to essentially protect a deeply unpopular system and structure and governing power, right? And so terror is used to sort of make sure that everyone's too scared to not comply. But I will say the folks in Minnesota and across the country, including here in Central Florida, that are organizing and building community and fighting back is definitely continues to inspire me, even throughout these really dark times.
And that's what we'll be focusing on in this episode, is what's happening in Florida when it comes to Trump's extreme immigration policies and how can you get more plugged in. I know that's been an ask that I've been getting a lot on social media and just in my personal networks of folks who want to help, they want to know how to help. And so we're going to spend a lot of time in the next 40-some minutes together diving into that. And of course, when I look at what the Trump administration is doing, I am reminded of those that over comply to this. I mean, I think it's important to always note that for a long time, Democrats, especially in Congress, but also here in Florida, have not championed supporting immigrants and have really given into the fearful rhetoric about immigrants. And I do think it's important for us to, we're going to focus on the horrors that we're seeing from ICE, but I always want to acknowledge the incredible contributions that immigrants have made. And I do think one effort that all of us can take, and you and I, Ida, we're daughters of immigrants, and we share that story with pride, because I do think it's important, if there's one thing that everyone can do, it is to share the positive stories and contributions of immigrants to counter that rhetoric, because the rhetoric of dehumanization, it just makes it it creates an environment where people are actually defending these murders. They're defending these killings. And that's when you've lost the plot, right? When you are defending the execution of protesters for exercising their First Amendment rights, and when you're defending the separation of families and the detainment of 5-year-olds, I truly think you've lost the plot. But I think a part of it, too, is it the propaganda that comes from the right that doesn't get challenged or questioned. And it's really important for us to play a role in shifting that narrative, in addition to the work on the ground and fighting back.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true to center the incredible contributions of our immigrant communities. And truly, no human is illegal, as we know. But you can't say it enough because that kind of language is deeply dangerous and it's by design. The Republicans and the far right generally leverage scapegoating to essentially blame another community for their grift, right? Because that's the thing. Xenophobia, racism, now and forever is always a tool to protect someone's wealth and power. And so really when you pull, the curtain and look behind, you'll always see someone who's profiteering off of this division. And again, when divide and conquer doesn't work, when communities start to unite and fight back, that's when they leverage things like terror and suppression and violence and criminalization. So folks are too scared to fight back, right? And so this is classic authoritarian playbook happening. And of course, for many Americans, particularly Black Americans, these are tactics they have endured for centuries in America. And across the world, folks have endured this kind of government, just violent overreach. And so lots of tools that we know are effective, but also it's a really scary time because the tools that they have that they're not scared to use. And so, but to your point, Anna, there's a lot of incredible organizing happening. And for many folks, we often say here in Florida, we sadly have seen the future because a lot of the fights happening federally we have dealt with here in Florida. For years, I was the lobbyist on the ground in the Florida legislature representing Florida Immigrant Coalition. And so we were on the front lines of that fight for several years, fighting back anti-immigrant legislation that it's very cookie cutter, and you saw the same bill pop up across states, right? And many of those models are now, of course, being leveraged in the federal government. And so there's a lot of incredible work happening here locally and statewide to fight back. And so to your point, we want to make sure folks know the different front lines and how to get engaged and support folks that have been doing this work for a long time here in Florida who need the extra support and capacity.
Yeah, well, let's dive into it. One of our goals is to always bring it back down to the state of Florida and what can you do right here on the ground? Because obviously the images of what's happening in Minneapolis, Florida is not immune to that. I think one of the distinctions between Florida and Minnesota obviously is a red state versus a blue state. And so there's no doubt in my mind that the Trump administration is weaponizing the government to target and demonize and create chaos in blue states and blue cities. Like much of this is political, right? And we can't ignore that. Here in Florida, because the DeSantis administration has over complied to ICE enforcement, you don't see the same type of presence of federal officials, but it can happen. And if it does happen, it's going to be targeting blue cities. Like, no doubt in my mind about that. But let's unpack that over compliance. What does it mean when I say that, right? And when you look at a map of Florida and you overlay it with the number of what are called 287G contracts, Florida is bright, 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 bright red because Governor DeSantis has really intimidated, and alongside the Attorney General, appointed Attorney General James Meyer, they have threatened local governments under this state statute around best effort to comply with immigration enforcement. And it basically said, with words and with force that you will be removed if you don't comply to these local elected officials. So unfortunately, there really hasn't been a lot of courage in this situation. And instead, we've seen local governments, even universities and their law enforcement agencies, sign these 287G agreements, basically deputizing a percentage of their officers to operate as if they're ICE liaisons. And in particular, Florida Highway Patrol, the acronym is FHP, but also folks know FHP as state troopers, 100% are deputized by 287G, and they have little cards they keep on them that say that. And so what we've seen across the state of Florida is, in particular, FHP be one of the main detainers. So FHP, which unfortunately we have seen commentary and videos and loose memos about FHP being asked to racially discriminate. And of course, we know the Supreme Court has also endorsed that position. And so you see folks who get typically pulled over potentially for minor traffic violations. But honestly, I think folks are getting pulled over who just are being profiled as immigrants. If you're driving a work truck in the dawn or dusk and so forth, and they'll ask if you have an ID. If you don't have an ID, they'll then detain you for that reason, bring you to a county jail. The jail will check a national database. And if you have a unregulated immigration status, you'll have that hold placed on you. It's called an ICE hold. And what ends up happening is if you're in the jail environment, if you have a criminal charge pending, then you're held under the local jail. But as soon as that local charge is dealt with, whether the charges are dropped or even you bail out, you don't actually leave the jail. You're then moved into an ICE dormitory where ICE picks up folks every hours. I mean, it used to be that they didn't come all the time, and now whether it's ICE or ICE contracts, they're picking up folks. And I will say, in Orange County, the contract that the county jail has with ICE is 72 hours that the jail has to hold people. But we're actually hearing of loopholes where ICE will take you out of the dorm when you're close to 72 hours, drive you around for a few hours, and then bring you back in an effort to reset that clock. So, I mean, again, we're not operating in an environment with laws or rules, that they're just making things up as they go. But I want to provide that context because this is why it's really, really important that if you care about this issue, to not just focus on what's happening at the federal level, but to shift your attention to local as well, to your local cities, your counties, your jails, your law enforcement agencies, your university, because at the end of the day, those 287G contracts are taking place at a local level. And it's important to make sure your voice is heard and you're holding those locals accountable to your values and of course to oppose these contracts.
And support those elected leaders that are fighting back, because to your point, the state is using intimidation to threaten folks, to threaten removal, and then appointing their own person or calling a special election and so forth. And so also holding folks accountable, and then really supporting and backing up those leaders that are fighting back, because the only way we can is with united people power, to really demonstrate that, we can wield power here. Like, if you're on our side, you're elected. If you're not, we get you out of office. And so part of that organizing is really important to be able to leverage that kind of power.
Yeah, I want to uplift that point, right? Because first of all, here in Orange County, we have two of those heroes. We have Commissioner Nicole Wilson and Commissioner Dr. Kelly Sumron, who were the only two that voted no on the jail contract, which, by the way, Orange County is losing money on, literally losing money on doing work for that is by the federal government. And they took a huge risk in voting no on that contract, and they continue to be such brave champions. In fact, it is Commissioner Nicole Wilson who has crafted a ordinance to prohibit, set a moratorium on any non-municipal detention facilities. And this was motivated by the fact that we've seen I send a advanced team from a private contractor called ESA Group to visit a warehouse in Orlando as a potential ICE detention facility. And this is a part of a larger push by ICE. We saw the Washington Post report a leaked memo in late December about ICE looking at warehouses to literally store humans, warehouses that are designed for commercial products, not for people. And Orlando is apparently on that map, which we only learned about because of another leak. So I do want to remind folks that if you have information, please share it. It's really important that we do the inside-outside strategy on this and to overshare to figure out what's happening, because none of this is happening in a place of transparency.
Right. And non-compliance looks different for everybody. And so
Right.
you being on the inside and being a whistleblower or sharing intel, like, that is non-compliance. And so there's many ways that we all can play a role in this moment to fight back and build something better.
Well, it obviously reminds me of Andor, and we
Of
haven't had enough Andor references in this podcast yet, but more will come. But if you don't know what Andor is, it's a Star Wars miniseries that takes place building up to Rogue One, and it covers the rise of fascism, but also the rise of the rebellion. And yeah, I mean, a lot of examples of this in Andor, which is
I think this is
sad.
it's very sad. And I think this is a good moment to let our listeners know you and I both have Star Wars tattoos, and Star Wars is a very
Of course.
important piece of certainly what you find inspiration in, I imagine.
Yes. I mean, I will constantly think about Star Wars motifs and themes and listen to Star Wars music just to get myself into a place of stability and hope. Because, yeah, the environment is really dire. And I do think that, unfortunately, history repeats itself. You mentioned earlier how some of the tactics that we're seeing to terrorize and divide communities are themes we've seen before. And I would be remiss to acknowledge a really powerful local production of On and Emmett that I was able to see by hosted at our JCC, and it basically tells the story of as if Anne Frank and Emmett Till met each other after their deaths. And it just tells both of their stories of experiencing bigotry, hate, and prejudice, and ultimately they're losing their lives because of it. And the similarities between how Nazi Germany raised so much hatred towards the Jewish people was exactly the same of how white Americans built a machine of hate and discrimination against Black Americans. And I just watching this play, I mean, and especially these two young actors, tell this story. It just reminded me of where we are today, but also like just the shame of political leaders who are lying to our faces. Like, I think we have to take a moment to talk about this, where you have Kristi Noem, and again, I know we try to focus on Florida, but I can't ignore this because the blatant propaganda and lying in our faces by these talking heads. And of course, it trickles down, right? Because they basically set this talking point at the top, and then they just like train people to reflect it. But it is sick. It is so sick to tell us that these folks that you killed are, so-called domestic terrorists. And meanwhile, we see the video. We see the video of what actually took place. And I mean, I just, it's so unsettling because, again, we've seen this play before. I mean, uh, everyone's been quoting, George Orwell, and rightfully so. I mean, it's so just, like, I mean, like, I will not be scared. Like, I will not be put in a place of fear. But my God, it's just like, it's so anxiety inducing and so unsettling, like how we're just seeing the script happen before us. And I thank everyone. I've seen a lot of folks, obviously show up to protest, but also a lot of platforms that typically are not political on social media that are making political statements. And I want to say thank you to folks who are doing that, because it is really important to disrupt people's feeds. Because again, the way social media works today is that you're just being fed content that feeds into your viewpoints, right? Nothing's really disrupting you. So for the food blogger, or for like the person who writes about, I don't know, scuba diving or bourbon, to then like talk about politics, like I'm really grateful for that, because I feel like you kind of need to disrupt people's daily scrolling with something that does kind of shock them a little bit, because I think it's the only way to get folks to get out of that algorithm and get out of that bubble.
I completely agree. I think I saw this meme that was like, "Oh, I don't do politics," and I was like, "Well, honey, politics is doing you." Like, so you don't have a choice. Like, it is,
Right.
and there is a privilege for many folks where politics felt like it wasn't impacting your life, and for so many of us, we don't have that, that opportunity. Depending on your class, color, your skin, if you're seeking an abortion or not, right? Like, politics does hit you in places that many folks often haven't had to feel. But in this moment of just escalated attacks and assaults on all of our freedoms, many folks that were able to stay not engaged certainly feel compelled to get engaged. And I think as an organizer, I see that as an opportunity to bring more folks in, like that we have to welcome people and empower people and find pipelines for folks to get involved, right? And so 100% that is so essential to help, burst those disinformation bubbles and bring more folks in a way that is inclusive. You actually always say this about constituent services. There's no wrong door. And so I think as organizers in this moment, we need to create systems where there's no wrong door, where everybody who wants to get involved, whether they have like their time, their treasure, like their donations, or just like a really unique skill that we can tap into, like we have to have opportunities for everyone to get involved. I
Yeah.
also did want to, I'm sad I missed that play you just spoke to. It sounds so important and meaningful. And to your point about history, I think as we know, as you noted, Nazi Germany took many notes from Jim Crow America, as well as the treatment of indigenous folks in America as they designed their laws and their plan. Mussolini's fascist Italy was very much elevated by a very weak opposition party and the church placating them, and other pieces that are also very familiar to America today. But I also think, to your point, like there's so much to learn from history. History does not have to repeat itself if we actually learn from it and change course. So history
Right.
is so essential because it can teach us, but it doesn't have to determine our future. But it's really important that we recognize the similarities so we can intervene effectively, right? And so I just
Right.
keep thinking about that in this moment. And I've asked folks that are much more built into folks that are much more deeper in history around like, so in that situation, what could have happened to stop it from going that far, right? Like what could we have done, right, if we had the power to act? And so and just
Yeah.
thinking about strategically, what are the ways that we can, stop this from getting worse? Because that's the scary thing too,
Yeah.
is that we might not have hit rock bottom yet, but how can we, as people engaged, as people who care, as just human beings, work together to stop this? Like, make this the worst. Because I think
Yeah.
that's what scares me. But I think I don't want us to feel powerless in it. I think we do have power to stop this. And so, how
Yeah.
do we do that effectively?
Well, and one of the points made in the play that I mentioned, which, by the way, like, I'm going to do everything I can to help with more showings. And I think school districts, I mean, obviously in this political climate, they probably won't be allowed to show it, but we got to find ways for students to see this play. But one of the history lessons that I have learned more about in the past year and a half was the United States and actually countries around the world not welcoming Jewish refugees who were trying to flee Nazi Germany. The United States, under the FDR administration, did not was not welcoming to Jewish refugees. I mean, they had anti-immigrant policies specifically targeting Jewish refugees, and to the point where there were boats being turned around to go back to Europe. And when and that same president, also was known as a champion on other issues, right? Locally and domestically. And even with civil rights, right? So I think it's so important for us to live our values authentically in all ways. And when you leave one group behind, you are leaving everyone behind. And it's really, really important that we don't repeat that part of history, right? Where it comes to like social movements and civil rights movements where women suffrage is another example, right? Like black women were left behind because white women saw a path forward without them. And so we cannot repeat that. We have to make sure that we are united together and build a multi-class, multiracial, multi-generational, multicultural coalition to win. And I do feel like we're doing that in Orlando.
The piece you're speaking to, I think, is solidarity, which is our only way out here. The only way out of this is through solidarity. And that is like your struggle is my struggle. We're in it together. And so the ways that we can build solidarity in this moment, in every level, in the workplace, in our neighborhood, online, that is the pathway to get out of this.
So you mentioned that you have in your previous capacity of advocating in the legislature worked with organizations like FLIC, Florida Immigrant Coalition. Tell folks more about FLIC and, just kind of what FLIC does and other organizations that you've had the chance to work with in that capacity.
Well, Florida Immigrant Coalition is a statewide organization that brings together all the different immigrant rights groups and community organizations, direct service organizations together to coordinate and organize and support immigrant communities. And so it is a coalition. So when you go to their website, you'll see so many different member organizations, and they really are a bottom-up, membership-led group. They also lead a lot of the efforts in the legislature. And so, of course, Anna, you are seeing many of these bills get introduced and be heard and already finding them in committee. And, they run the gambit of things that include removing the ability for undocumented students to go to college in Florida, from removing professional licensing opportunities for immigrants. There's also just different proposals around surveillance in Florida. There's literally an appropriation around Celebrate, which is that surveillance company that, if you've seen a lot of warnings about protect your phone when you go through customs at airports, this is the company that creates technology where they can literally just plug a cord into your phone and take all your data, regardless of your password or anything like that. And there's a lawmaker in Florida who wants the state to get has an appropriation for this company for the state. And so there's a lot of different attacks happening in the legislature against all of our different communities, and it's being pushed by very, very aligned far right, and a lot of these bills are being seen in other states too. But if you want to get engaged in the legislature, Florida Immigrant Coalition is great, but they also do support work on the ground and with grassroots organizations across the state.
Awesome. To lift up a few more orgs that I've had the honor of just working in partnership with on the ground for years in defense of our immigrant communities, the Florida Farm Worker Association. And of course, they're part of the Flick partnership, but they're directly supporting farm workers. And there's individual chapters, including the Immokalee farm workers and so forth. But I do think supporting and following the Florida Farm Worker Association, another wonderful organization that could use all the support right now and is engaged on know your rights workshops and so forth. Um, Two organizations that I've worked with that do specifically legal support. Community Justice Project based out of Miami and Orlando Center for Justice based out of Orlando. Now, these are two organizations that, as you can imagine, are overwhelmed and overworked. They do need resources. They've lost federal funding when it comes to representing immigrant youth. And so they're 100% run at this point on like private donations. And so I do think if you're somebody who has some change to drop, those are two really good organizations that are providing essential representation to impacted communities. And they also have been great thought partners for us. Like when we are facing a complicated legal situation, I can always call these organizations and they'll give me guidance and support. They've also been involved, especially Alana Greer at Community Justice Project. Shout out to Alana. Doing just amazing legal work in fighting back in court on these issues, fighting back against state pressure on 287G, representing detainees in places like the Everglades detention camp and so forth. So much love and respect. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Friends of the Everglades who have been like championing litigation to close the Everglades detention camp based on environmental policy. So we've also had some partnerships that are kind of intersectional, also with indigenous communities as well. So it's not always organizations that are like specifically on immigrant policy. There's groups that we've worked with that are intersectional, adjacent. And then the last organization I want to lift up, at least for Orlando, I'm sure there's many more out there, but Hope Community Center in Apopka. So they are an organization historically that has served farm worker communities, immigrant communities. They were started by Apopka nuns at a time in Apopka where the community was heavily segregated. And they're also kind of like the hub in Central Florida for the Immigrants Are Welcome Here Coalition, which is one of those examples that you mentioned, Ida, of solidarity. The Immigrants Are Welcome Here Coalition is focused on local issues in Central Florida, not only helping with like ICE Watch and legal observers and know your rights workshops, but also helping organize around local governments on these policies. And they were instrumental in the pushback against the jail 287G contract, alongside, of course, other policies that we're facing. And so you can follow the Immigrants for Welcome Here Coalition on Facebook and Instagram.
And you mentioned things like know your rights, and I think it's important to know, of course, in this moment, a lot of folks are very validly saying ICE does not care about my rights. They're just coming in no matter what. And that is a reality. And so I think the important piece is in this short term, it's harm mitigation. In the long term, it's completely changing the structures, right? That means abolishing ICE. That means prosecution of folks who have been working for ICE and violating our rights. And also, I think we have to think about in the long term, like what truth and reconciliation looks like, because that is a moment if this country's ever going to heal. We've never done as a country, and so how can that really happen? You noted efforts to have a moratorium on detention contracts, right? We also know that many states, their law enforcement is not engaged with ICE. Like there's prohibitions of that, right? That's the case in Minneapolis. So the way that in Florida, local law enforcement have been deputized and are often required to act as ICE agents adds a whole other level of threat when you look at our data and surveillance and the amount of data that ICE has and that local governments, local law enforcement have. It just adds this whole other layer of threats. And also, knowing your rights is still important, both in your home and in the workplace. And if you are an employer or you run some sort of private space, you have a lot of power, relatively speaking, to defend your employees and your consumers. And I was just looking at an effort in Minnesota to empower Fourth Amendment businesses, right? Because the Fourth Amendment protects us from unlawful search and seizure. And so they're getting companies to sign this pledge saying, I'm a Fourth Amendment business. I'm going to defend the Fourth Amendment in my workplace, right? And so there are other ways that we can hold companies accountable, hold these big employers accountable that are working in coordination with ICE to defend folks as well, that we're seeing in other communities too, that I know folks in Central Florida and in the state are looking at.
Well, the irony to all of this is everything you just shared, it almost sounds conservative, right? Like the Fourth Amendment, like can't be on my property without without a reason, without a warrant, signed by a judge. Like these were values that historically were always preached, including gun ownership, which now, in the case of the murder of Alex Preddy, there's been accusations of him having his firearm on him, and even the NRA, push back against what is coming out of right wing pundits. So I appreciate you uplifting all this. I'm just so frustrated, right, by what feels like
I know.
a lot of just
Yeah.
like sick irony and hypocrisy. But
Absolutely, but I will say, and we talked about this last pod too, I think, the only consistent value in the far right's ideology is concentrated power. So
right,
whatever it takes to do that. So they'll spin lies about big government or small government, but none of that matters. It's always been about concentrated power. Now, the rank and file of like the Republican Party, they might actually believe in those values. So
right.
that's why some, like, you're seeing some fractures where folks are freaking out, because they were actually believers in small government and privacy and the Fourth Amendment and Second Amendment. And so you're seeing folks freak out because, like, wait a minute, this is not what we stand for. But the party elite, they've always been bought and sold, and it's always about how can I centralize my power to make money and keep people either divided among themselves, or if they unite, we violently suppress them. Like, that is what's happening right now, and that
Right.
is the
Or
model that happens across the world.
and mass detainment and incarceration,
Correct.
right?
Which also, as we've spoken to, we see this with the prison system, is also a form of forced labor. Which, of course, in America, the founding of this country's economy is very much based on kidnapping, trafficking Africans, and enslaving people, and that was a form of forced labor. And like in that moment, right, racism was leveraged as a tool to justify forced labor. And so you can never separate our freedoms from the economy. And I know I'm like a broken record when I talk about this, but there's always some entity, some person, some group that is making a profit off of this system, an oppressive system.
Like voting is sometimes kind of dismissed because the system is so designed to be broken, like everything we talked about. But I do want to highlight, like, the new Virginia governor, one of the first actions that she did was end the state's like working relationship with ICE. And then you also had the mayor of Miami that did the same thing to end the 2A17 contract. And so, like, I do want to emphasize that, sometimes in election cycles, like, you're not necessarily voting for the person that excites you and inspires you the most or agrees with you 100% of the time. Sometimes you're voting for your adversary. Like, you're choosing who you want to influence across the table from you and who will be more just open to your influence, right? And I would argue that it would having an administration that at least is values aligned, maybe not always issue and policy aligned, but values aligned, would be a lot easier to influence than where we are today, where there is no influence whatsoever. And so, I always want to emphasize, like, please don't always wallow in the sense that there is no out. Like, there are systems that we all participate, we can help change. But if we don't participate, then we're going to be stuck with the status quo, which we all know is horrifying and full of inequities and so forth.
Well, there is a reason why the Ron DeSantis and the far right in this state have passed voter suppression bill after voter suppression bill after voter suppression bill, while the history of this country has been about denying certain groups the right to vote and others making it very easy to vote, right? So voting is absolutely a power that we have. And it's one that our opposition is very excited to take away, right? And which is why also with criminalization, like, you get charged with a crime, you can't vote, right? All these different pieces that make that deny our freedom to vote in this country and in this state. I love how you talk about you are at times, like, in a perfect world, you are electing the person that comes from your community, that is with you, that is ready to work with everyday people to make something different. But oftentimes it's more of like, who am I going to negotiate with? And so that question that you noted is like, who's going to be my opponent is such an important organizing question, and it's one that's really about who can I influence more power over. And then again, that question is like, how am I building power? And I always think, like, in these moments, how are we in the fight stronger than when we started it? And it was a hard lesson I've learned through the work, because at the end, often we're burnt out too, and we lose folks in the fight. And so I keep asking, how can we bring more people in? How can we be stronger through the work versus more exhausted and burnt out through the work. And so I think that's super important as we build, like, folks get engaged in existing infrastructure and build new organizations. Like, how are we thinking about bringing more people in to build that
Right.
power
Right.
that can help us in the long term, right? I always do believe, as goes Florida, as goes the rest of the country. Sadly, we're seeing that, right? When you see, like, I just cannot believe some of these people that are making decisions, whether it's Rubio and Pam Bondi, and like seeing world leaders go to Mar-a-Lago. I mean, my heart is just constantly
God,
like,
I know. We could do an entire episode on incompetency in the federal government right now. Like, I mean, there's just so many examples of individuals that are so unqualified to be in their positions of decision making, and it's
totally.
horrifying. I mean,
Yes,
the
yes.
president being one of them. But
100%. Yeah.
you mentioned earlier, like, know your rights, and I want to just echo the point that Ida just made for our listeners. Like, I know there's a lot of feelings about what's the point of know your rights materials and trainings because ICE is not following the law. And I think that's fair criticism. At the same time, to Ida's point, harm mitigation is important. And also understanding what risks you are willing to take and not take is important. And understanding what the US Constitution says, understanding what the laws are today is important because God forbid you are in a situation where it's being escalated and you are in harm's way. Mitigating that harm as much as you can is really important, not only for your life in the context of what we see ICE doing, but also, of course, in the legal battle to get you out of your situation. Like, I mean, unfortunately, they will look for any reason to detain and arrest you. So don't, as much as you can, right? Like mitigate that harm just to protect yourself and the people around you. And so I always want to emphasize that this is such a an escalated political environment right now. It is one that fear is being used to silence people and to push people into the shadows. And so as we combat that, just be aware of that legal landscape, and you'll never know when it might be able to become a saving grace for yourself or those around you. And you mentioned employers in particular. I have spoken to many employers before that are looking for sample ICE policies to protect themselves and their employees, and to have a plan of lockdown, and to really be thoughtful, especially if they're a medical provider, of keeping their patients safe, or they're a school to keep their students safe. And so there's a lot of great resources out there, and I would not overlook that. If you don't if you're an employer or you are a client, right, or a student, and you don't know what your institution's ICE protocol is, please find out. And that's one, like, hyper local thing you can do just to make sure that your employer and the institutions you engage with are not only values aligned, but just prepared, because that's literally the ecosystem we're in right now. I've got a lot of questions about the status of the Everglades Immigrant Detention Camp, of course, also known by the governor as alligator Alcatraz, which is not a term I use. And I want to remind folks that despite the legal success we've had, we also have had setbacks. And this is a lawsuit that I'm a witness in. I was in federal court testifying on what I witnessed as someone who has been on the ground inside this facility while it's populated. And it's a memory that will never leave me. And it's one that was just gut wrenching to witness, but important to see with my own eyes, so that, again, we can uh, make sure the voices of those that are being detained there, which, by the way, based on FDLE's own data, more than 90% of those being detained have no criminal background whatsoever. And that's, of course, reflective of national data as well. That counters the propaganda coming from the right on who they're detaining and deporting. But ultimately, this facility is not only is it still open, but it continues to grift off not competitive government contracts. And I think that brings us to talking about that grift of the week, because there's unfortunately so many examples of your tax dollars going to friends of the DeSantis administration, going towards the lack of due process and wrongful detainment of individuals, money that could go towards housing and public transportation and schools and teacher pay. And so I know, Ida, you have a few more specifics you want to go into about some of these grifts, but we are still in litigation on closing this facility. And there was a win recently in court where public records have to be shared with the plaintiffs. But ultimately, Florida is now home to at least 3 different detention facilities. And that's Chrome, which is the federal one that's been in Miami for a long time. Horrible track record on safety. Baker, a former state prison converted to an immigrant detention camp, and then the Everglades camp. But the governor has said he's planning to open up another location in the Panhandle, and obviously we know of ICE looking at these warehouses to be converted.
Just a nightmare, horrifying. And to your point about the grift, and so that law firm actually that the governor's office has hired to defend the Everglades immigrant detention camp was paid $1 million, and most of that was paid out on New Year's Eve, probably in an effort for folks not to see it. So there's $1 million there. And to your point, the governor's slush fund, which there's actually a bill proposed that would make his slush fund permanent, but the slush fund to fund the detention center has already cost Floridians. Let me make sure I'm setting the right number here. They estimate it would cost $450 million a year to run. They spent more than $200 million barely a month after the facility opened, and to countless different no bid contracts, to your point. And so just the amount of money being made on detention in Florida and across the country of our tax dollars that could be spent on the things that you noted that we need so desperately. And I would be remiss if I didn't note just the supercharged ICE presence we're seeing in Florida and across the country, of course, was linked to the federal funding bill, what Trump called, the so-called one big beautiful bill, which is just the one big grift. And that bill supercharged ICE funding and also had many millions in giveaways, tax breaks to the ultra wealthy and corporations, and paid for it by taking away healthcare and SNAP benefits and other essential things that millions, estimates about 1.5 million Floridians are going to lose healthcare coverage because of that bill. But meanwhile, we see ICE wreaking havoc and terrorizing our communities, and many, many state dollars being grifted away to detain immigrants in our communities and terrorize us. So the grift of the week, like I said, in immigration, there's countless money being made on this. And the other piece, of course, is the forced labor, which is very prevalent in the prison system. And one of the big fears we're going to see even more prevalent immigrant detention. There's already cases of it, but seeing that escalated, especially as they are terrorizing folks that are really driving the economy of our state and our country too. So that is another piece to be very hyper aware of and alert to.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Ida. Very well said. And I know this has been a really heavy episode, y'all. But like I said, when we started it, there's no other feeling that I can even think about right now. Everything feels very heavy. But it's that solidarity and that collective commitment that helps to carry the weight together, so it can feel a little bit lighter. But there's just no way to sugarcoat the situation that we're in right now. It's dark. It's really dark. And something I think about a lot, Ida, not to go too off topic, but it's the concept of someone who's gone forever. And I'm sorry, it just pains me, It's really kind people that are out there defending others that are losing their lives for it. It's just so incredibly brave. So I just want to express my condolences. I mean, to anyone who's been directly impacted, and just please know that you're not alone. And there's a lot of people that care so deeply, even if you don't know us. We're out there, we're doing the work, and so please find a way to join us. And again, time, talent, treasure. Every commitment makes a huge difference.
Oh, Anna. Yeah. No, it does. Well, and I know one of our listeners asked what's inspiring us during this time, this really, really hard, difficult time, and you definitely inspire me. And so many countless folks in our community, I think Alex Purdy's parents use the word hero, and they say we don't use it lightly. And I think there's countless, I agree with that. And also there's so many heroes right now that are taking up that mantle and being so brave to defend each other and our rights. And I was just recently at the funeral service, the homecoming for a friend of ours, Alfonso Mayfield, who was the president of the SEIU, Florida Public Sectors Union, and an incredible organizer, a man from Mississippi who blessed Florida with his incredible vision and talents and empowered so many folks to be the heroes in our communities. And he's why we're doing this podcast. He was the brains behind really motivating us, organizing us into doing this, and is no longer with us in this plane. But we honor his legacy and so many folks' legacies through little acts that make a big difference combined. And I know I always go back to this, but Our opposition's model of power is power in the hands of the very elite few. It is concentrated power. Our model of power is collective power. It's solidarity, and it's all of us working together for a collective vision. And that work can be a little messy. It can be a little, a little dicey. We've all got different visions, but together, I know we can build something really beautiful. And I'm just really proud to be in this work with you, Anna.
Yeah, and Alfonso Mayfield, rest in power, brother. He came down to Orlando for the SAU endorsement of our mayor's race, which just meant so much to me that he and Afifa both made the effort to even come down. So unnecessary, but it was so important to him to be there for us, for me, and everything we do is in honor of those no longer with us. And so, Alfonso, just thank you for really showing us like how to build right a multicultural, multiracial, multi-class, and multi-generational movement, and much love to his family as well. I mean, we lost an incredible leader, but they lost a dad and a husband, and again, forever's a really long time. So we have to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for staying with us on this. We hope this was I think met the heaviness we're all feeling, but also leaves you with really tangible ways to take action, to fight the good fight in this moment, and to not let history repeat itself fully,
Ugh.
to stop and to change course. And we can do that together, but it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of bravery, a lot of solidarity. Compliance is not the way forward. We have to find ways to fight back together and look after each other. And we are here for that journey together. And so that wraps up this episode of Twinning with Anna and Ida.
Oh my god. It was only a matter of time before I cried on this podcast.
I think we did pretty good. Like, not for us not
All
crying until
things
episode 3.
all things
Like,
considered.
yeah, exactly. I think that's
Um
impressive.
One of my favorite quotes from Andor, in addition to "I have friends everywhere." But yeah, I'd rather die fighting than die giving them what they want. And I think it speaks to why we keep going despite the slim chances we have sometimes of winning. But
Well, and I
it's always
know
worth fighting.
it is always worth fighting. I mean, when it comes to things that bring us hope or inspiration, I mean, I find healing in the fight. It makes me feel I feel more hopeful when I am with community trying to affect change. So that you always say this, what is it? Action is the antidote to despair. And I feel it most when I'm knocking on doors, when I'm just out in the community, talking to people, engaging people, having just like human to human connection. That is when I feel we can win, we can do this. And history has shown us in so many examples of where we have won, we can do this. And I think the other piece is remembering the long arc of it. There's so many rights we have that took decades to achieve, and we might not get to live to see the world of our dreams, but we're
Oh my
fighting
god,
for
that's another
future
Andor
generations.
quote.
Well, I haven't seen the series yet. I
Oh my god, what are you waiting for?
I mean,
Probably time.
time.
Probably time, yeah.
I mean,
Well, just
I know it's incredible you found time, but I know you're doing it while you have like 3 screens on and you're doing like 20 million things. But
no, the one thing I will make time for is Star Wars.
since
But,
like since like 1994, Anna Eskamani has been making time for Star Wars.
no, I don't mean to interrupt you, I apologize for that, but you
No,
just,
no.
yeah, another good quote is, like, I don't know verbatim, but we're fighting for a sunrise we may never see. And we have to be okay with that. Like, we truly have to be okay with that and build our own little sunrises along the way to sustain ourselves, but yeah, it's, it's hard, but god, it's so worth it. It's so worth it, so thanks for doing it, Ida.
Thanks for doing it, Anna.